everyone! For this tutorial, we're going to look at something you guys have already done in Python, classes and objects. Now, we're going to look at practice assignment 5 for classes and objects 1 and practice assignment 6 for classes and objects 2. We'll do exercises from each practice assignment. So as a quick reminder, let's go through what classes and objects are. So basically, classes are a template for creating objects, meaning it's a kind of mold through which you create objects with similar features. Every class has variables and methods that correspond to the attributes of objects and how the objects behave. Remember Scanner? Scanner is a predefined class in Java. Predefined classes are classes that already exist for you, so you can just invoke or use their methods. Now, objects, also known as instances of classes, are entities you can manipulate and on which you can invoke methods you specified in your class. So if we look at Scanner, which all of you have used and probably memorized the 2 lines you need to be able to use it, here is what we see. So Scanner, SC, is new Scanner, system.in, and int x is sc.nextInt. Here you're creating an instance of Scanner or an object called sc. And here you're invoking a method called nextInt on the object sc. Now let's take another example, where we create the class ourselves. Let's create the class cats. So a cat would have attributes and behaviors. The attributes would be breed, age, and color. The behaviors would be meow, sleep, eat, and purr. We can then proceed to create objects of type cats, like cat1, cat2, cat3, and cat4, all with the same attributes and behaviors. So let's write the class in Java. Okay, so let's write our code. As you can see, I changed some of the settings in the compiler I'm using. I removed the dark background and I made the font larger because I think some of you guys may have had a hard time during the last tutorial, so I hope this is clearer. Anyway, so this is our class cats, and I'm going to add my attributes, which were breed, age, and color. So private string breed, private int age, and private string color. I'm also going to add one more attribute of type boolean, which will help me with one of my methods, and I'm going to set its default value to false. Now these attributes, notice how they are all private. This means that only this class and instances or objects of this class can access or have these attributes. Now remember the init method in Python? Well, in Java we write the same thing but in a different way. What this does is set certain values for variables for the instance or object being created. Now this is called the default constructor. You can have multiple constructors in a class as long as you give the parameters with different names. And for your general knowledge, having multiple constructors is called constructor overloading. So basically that there are different versions of this constructor. So let's write our constructor, our default constructor, public cats, and I'm going to give it my parameters. So every cat has a breed, an age, and the color. So breed will be given the value of BR, age will be given the value of A, and color will be given the value of C. So this is our default constructor. Now let's take a look at our methods. So we said meow, eat, sleep, and purr. So public void meow, because it's not going to return anything, it's actually just going to print out. So I wanted to print the cat is meowing. I'll then create another void method, this time called eat. And I'm going to let it print that the cat is eating. I'm also going to change the value of is happy to true. I'm going to assume that when a cat eats, it becomes happy. Otherwise, it's not happy. We also have public void sleep. There, you can say the cat is sleeping. And finally, my last method, purr, which I will say if is happy is true, then print the cat is purring. Otherwise, I want you to print looks like you didn't feed your cat. All right, so these are our methods. Now, in my main method, I'm going to create an instance of the class. So let's write a main method. Public static void main. And I'm going to create my cats. So cat1, new cats. It's a Persian type. It is 2 years old and it is white. And then I can write cat2. Cat2 will be Siamese. It will be 1 year old and gray. So here and here, what we're doing is we are calling the default constructor and giving values to the attributes. So now that we have 2 cats with different values for their attributes, let's invoke our methods. So I'm going to start with cat1 dot meow and cat1 dot eat, cat1 dot sleep, cat1 dot Then I will do the same thing for cat 2. Cat 2, 2, 2, 2. And just so that we can differentiate, I'm going to write this is cat 1. And I'm going to write the same thing for cat 2 so you guys can tell the difference. Now let's run our code and see what happens. Alright, so you see here, for cat 1, the cat is meowing, the cat is eating, the cat is sleeping, the cat is purring. Because it ate, it's purring. But for cat 2, the cat is also meowing, eating, sleeping, and purring. If I remove eat and I run, I will get that the cat is meowing and sleeping, but then it looks like you didn't feed your cat. It's not purring, therefore it's not happy. So now that we have our attributes, our methods, and our constructor, we will now add our instance methods. These are methods that are designed to work on or do something for a current object, and it includes the getters and setters. So let's assume we want to change a cat's breed. We will write the following. So write public void set breed, and it takes a parameter, a string, and write this breed equals breed. This is the setter. Now I want to talk to you guys about this keyword. This is a reference variable in Java, and you guys also saw it in Python, and it refers to the current object. So another way I can write my constructor over here is as follows. I can write this dot read, this dot age, and this dot color. So this is another way I can write my constructor. Now, if I want to get a cat's breed, I will write a getter. So getters are usually written like this. Public string get breed, and it takes no parameters, and I will return this dot breed. Notice how setters take in parameters while getters only return. And they return depending on what is it that you want to return. So if you are returning a string, then therefore they are going to be of type string. Those are the getters. Now another example of an instance method can be a method that simply displays information. Like for example, if I decide to write public void display, and what it does is it will print out each of my attributes. Read, and I can do the same thing for age and color. So now if we try to display cat1 and cat2, we will write the following. So here, I can write cat1.display, and here I can write cat2.display. So if I run, here we go. For cat1, Persian, it's 2 and it's white. And for cat2, it's Siamese, it's 1 and it's gray. Now, what if I wanted to keep track of every cat we created? This would be called a class variable, and we would write the following. I'd go up here, and I would write private static int num of cats equals 0, and I would write private int all cats. We would then add it into constructor this way. So I'll come here, and I'll add this dot all cats equals num of cats plus plus, or plus 1. So basically I'm adding 1 every time I'm creating a new cat. We can then add a getter to fetch the number of cats we have created. So we can add a getter here. Get num of cats. Now we'll return num of cats. So now if I print the number of cats we've created, we should get 2 cats. Cats.numCats. I can write the number of cats created is, and I run. So in the end, since I created 2 cats, I should get 2. There we go. If I create more cats, so if I create a 3rd cat, cat 3, and I say it's a tabby, 10 years old, and it is silver, and I run, now I have 3 cats that have been created. Okay, I want to test my getter and my setter. So if I say that here I'm going to create a 4th cat, 4, and it's going to be Himalayan, and it will be 5 years old, and it will be gray. And then I decide that I want to maybe change this breed. So first, what I will do is, I'm going to do cat4.getBreed. So it will print the breed for me. And then I will do cat4.set breed, and I will change it to British short hair, which is another breed of cats. And then I will do this once again. And let's see if the breed will change. So remember, for cat 4, the breed was Himalayan, and I want to change it. So if I run, it doesn't give me anything. Why is that? Because I have to print it out. If I don't print it out, it's not going to give me anything because it returns a value. So system.out.print line, and I'll do the same thing again. There you go. So it was Himalayan, and then it was changed to British short hair. So now I know that my getter and my setter are working. So I hope this example clarified a few things for you guys. The more you practice, the more you'll understand. So now we're going to solve a few questions to help you understand classes a bit more. You guys probably saw some of these questions before and solved them for Python, so solving them again for Java should be simple. Part A wants us to define a class airplane model with the attributes defined above. So we will write the following. We'll write our attributes. We have string name. We have a double empty weight. We have int seats. And we have double fuel consumption. Now, these are our attributes. Part B, augment your class with a default constructor and the constructor that initializes an airplane with only a name and number of seats, in addition to a constructor that initializes an airplane with a name, empty weight, number of seats, and fuel consumption. So we need 3 constructors here. So our first constructor is the default constructor. We will write public airplane model, and it will take 4 parameters: string n, double e, int s, and double f. We will then say that name is equal to n. We'll say empty weight is equal to e, seats is equal to s, and fuel consumption is equal to f. That's it. That is our default constructor. We then look on to the next constructor that initializes an airplane with only a name and the number of seats. So we will create another constructor. With only a name and a number of seats. In this case, we write that name equals n. However, empty weight will be given a value of 0. Seats will be equal to S. And fuel consumption will be given a value of 0. Now our third constructor. Right, public airplane model. And it takes no parameters because we are going to initialize all of the attributes. So name will be an empty string, empty weight will be 0, seats will be 0, and fuel consumption will be 0. This way, we have created the 3 constructors that are required. Part C. Augment your class with the following methods. So first, we have getName, getEmptyWeight, getSeats, and getFuel consumption. These are our 4 getters. So let's write them down. We have public string getName, and this will take no parameters and return name. We will then have double get empty weight, which will also take no parameters, and it will return empty weight. We have, sorry, I forgot to write public here. We have public int get seats, and we will return seats. And finally, we'll have our last getter for our last attribute, fuel consumption. And we will return fuel consumption. And that's it. These are our 4 getters. Next, we are required to create a method called addSeats that takes a parameter of type integer to add x seats to an airplane. All right? Then in that case, we will create, since it does not return anything, and it just adds seats to the airplane, we will make it a void method. So we'll call it addSeats. This will take an integer x as stated, and we will add an x number of seats to the existing number of seats. That's addSeats. Then we have display, which will display a full report about the airplane, including name, empty weight, number of seats, and fuel consumption. So, again, since it's going to display, so it's going to print, so we don't need to return anything, so we can make it a void method. So, public static void display actually, hold on. This is a different one. This is the second one. The one that is required for the display to display a full report, this one we will create one of type string, actually, so that it can return what is it that we need. It will return a string of everything that we need. So it will return name, and we also want it to return, for example, if I write name and I want it to give me the empty weight, so I will write empty weight equals, and I will give it the empty weight, and then I will require the number of seats. So remember, so require the number of seats, so seats equals seats, and then I will write fuel consumption, and that is it. That is basically what I'm returning. My name, empty weight, seats, and fuel consumption. Now, the next one is the static void display that takes a type airplane, takes a parameter of type airplane. So static void display. This will take the type airplane model A. So what this is going to do is display a full report about the airplane, including all of the information on it. So what I'm going to do is, I will basically do the same thing as before, but instead of returning, I'm going to print, and I'm going to take all the information for airplane model A, specifically airplane model A. So what I will do is system.out.print line, and I will take the same thing, however, with one difference. Sorry, here I'm supposed to write name plus. One difference is that I am going to, you can see here, they're all red because something is wrong. What are these attributes supposed to be for? Well, I want them for airplane model A. So in that case, I'll write A.name. I'll write A.empty weight. I'll write A.seats and A.fuel consumption. So I'm basically getting the information for airplane model A. Next part is to write a method called compare. It compares airplane A with the airplane in which the method will be invoked. And it returns the difference between the seat number for the airplane which the method is invoked and airplane A. Alright. So, what I will do is, I will create public static int compare. Now it's int, it's an integer, because what I'm going to return is the difference between the seats. So, I'm going to give it airplane model A and what will happen here is that I'm going to return seats minus A dot seats. So basically I am returning the difference between the number of seats for the object on which the method is invoked, the object airplane, which the method is invoked, and this airplane A, right here. Next, it wants me to do the same thing again. This time, it wants me to compare airplane model A and airplane model B. Sorry, it's not static, it's just int. So, in this case, I can write public static int compare, and note that the signature for each method is given to you in the question. So it told us that compare was not a static int, but in this case it is a static int when it takes two types or two parameters for two types of airplanes. So airplane A, plane model A, and airplane model B. I will then proceed to return the difference between the two seats. So, how is this done? I'm going to return A dot seats minus B dot seats. That's it. So these are all the things that are required of us to do. So now we want to go to part D, and we want to create a main method that constructs one airplane model and performs the following things on it. So let's create our main method first. So take void now inside I'm going to create an airplane model, and I'll call it A1 equals new airplane model. Now, what does the question want us to do? It wants us to initialize one airplane model of the constructor that takes two parameters. So it has a name, Boeing, and 200 seats. So we're only going to give it two parameters. So Boeing and 200. And then it wants us to display the number of seats of the airplane. So to display the number of seats of the airplane, I want to print out I want to get the seats for A1. So I'm going to write A1 dot get seats. This is going to print out the number of seats for A1. And then it's asking me to add 50 seats to the airplane. So to add 50 seats to the airplane, what I'm going to do is A1 dot add seats, and I'm going to give it a number, which was x 50, since add seats takes only one parameter here, as you can see, and it's going to add 50 to the number of seats. Next, it's asking us to display the number of seats of on the airplane, again, because the number of seats has changed. So let's print out seats again. Here, we'll see how it has changed. So in here, it should give us 250 seats, because originally we had 200, and then we added 50, so we should get 250 seats. Next, it's asking us to display and report about the airplane. So let's display a report about the airplane. I'm going to print I'm going to get A1 dot display. Now, okay, now we'll go on to the next part. Is to initialize another airplane model with the constructor that takes all the parameters from the user. So if we're going to take parameters from the user, we're going to use scanner. Now obviously it's giving me red because I did not import scanner, so let's import scanner at the top. Remember, you can either write it this way or you can write import java.util.scanner. Either one works. Now, I'm going to take 4 different parameters from the user. So I can write string n, string name equals sc dot next. I can get double, and I'm asking here my double is empty weight equals sc dot next double, and then I will be taking in integer, and seats equals sc dot next int, and finally I'm taking another double for fuel consumption equals sc dot next double. So these are the 4 parameters I'll be taking. So I'll be creating a new airplane model called A2, new airplane model, and I will give it name, empty weight, seats, and fuel consumption. Now this way, I have passed all the parameters that I need. I'm going to then use my 2 compare methods to compare airplane A1 to airplane B1. So I'm going to write the following. If A1 dot, if A1 dot compare A2, since it takes a parameter of type airplane model, is greater than or equal to 0, because basically what it's doing is it's returning an integer. So if the number is greater than 0, and since it's going to be A1 minus A2, that means that A1 is our plane with the larger seat capacity. So if A1 compare A2 is greater than 0, I will return, or instead of return, how about I just print it out? System dot out dot print line A1 dot get name, else system dot out dot print line A2 dot get name. Then I will use my other method, which works in a different way. It's going to take both A1 and A2. So I'm going to compare A1 and A2, and if it's greater than 0, or greater than or equal to 0, then I will do the exact same thing. And this way, if A1 is in number of seats of A1 and A1 is greater than the number of seats at A2, it's going to give me the name of A1. Otherwise, it will give me the name of A2. Obviously, there is a shorter way of writing these two, but I thought I would write it out like this for you guys. There's an extra here. And now we can run and see what we get. So if I run airplane model, oh yeah, it's waiting for the parameters. So since we have the parameters here at the beginning, it's waiting for them. What I can do is, I can actually take these parameters and put them here. This way when I run, it'll ask me for the parameters after it's printed out the first few things I asked for. So you see here, it gave me 200 seats. A1 has 200 seats. And I added 50 seats, so it gave me 250 seats. And then it gave me all the information on my airplane. Next, I'm going to give it the parameters it's asking for. So I'm going to call it A380. That's the name. Empty weight, I will say 200. Seats, I will say 150. Or actually, A380s are pretty big, so I'll say 500. And fuel consumption, I will say 100. So as you can see, in both cases, it gave me A380. Now, what's the difference between this compare and this compare? This compare is, it only takes one parameter, and it is invoked on an object. So A1.compare. This one, on the other hand, is not invoked on any object. It just takes two parameters or two objects of type airplane and it compares them. So both of them basically do the same thing, just in different ways. Okay, let's look at question number 2 on complex numbers. So, in this exercise, we will develop a complex number class. A complex number needs two memory locations reserved for the real and imaginary parts, and it must provide methods to perform operations such as addition and subtraction. So the complex class will possess two floating point fields for the real and imaginary values, and several methods to carry out the operations allowed on these values. Okay, so we're going to first, in part A, define a class complex with the attributes defined above. So the attributes defined are that you have two numbers, one real and one imaginary, and they are both floating point numbers. So we will write double R and double I. Those are our two numbers. Part B, augment your class with a constructor that initializes the values. So we are going to create a constructor that initializes the values, but we should also create our default constructor. So let's have our default constructor first. Double real number and double imaginary number. And in our default constructor, R equals real number and I equals imaginary number. Now we will do the constructor that is required that initializes both variables. So public complex, it will take no parameters since we are requiring it to initialize the variables. So we will initialize R to be 0 and I to be 0. So you see here, no parameters are taken in because we are giving R and I the values. On the other hand, in the default constructor, it takes in two parameters because these two parameters will define what are the values of R and I. Next, we go on to part C. Augment your class of the following methods. So it wants methods for the get real and the get imaginary part. So that's two getters. So public get real and we will return R. Public double get real. And then public double get imaginary. And we are going to return I. Those are our two getters. Next, it wants us to add two methods to add two complex numbers. The first method has only one parameter as input, public void add complex C value, and the second method has two parameters as input. All right, the method should create a new complex object with the sum. Okay, then if we are going to create the first method, public void add, and it takes a parameter of type complex, so I'm going to call it complex C, and it wants us to add it wants us to add to this method, and so it wants us to basically do addition inside the method. So to do that, what I can do is I will take my real number and add to it, my already existing real number, and add to it c.r, the real number for complex number c. I will do the same thing for I, plus c.I. So this way, what I did is when a method is invoked for a specific object, it will add that whatever I have in here for complex C to that object. We'll see how that works. Next, I will do the second complex one, which is public static, the second addition method. Public static complex add. Right, complex C1 and complex C2. So, why is it of type complex? Well, the question specifies that it wants us to return a complex or a new complex object. So this is why it is of type complex. So what it will do is it will return an object of type complex. Again, what we want to do is we want to add C1, this complex number, to this complex number. We want to add the imaginary parts and we want to add the real parts to each other. So how will that be done? We will return a new complex number and we will say c.r plus, or sorry, not c, c1.r plus c2.r, and it will take c1.i plus c2.i. Now, what did I do here? I basically created a new object or a new instance of complex. And then I gave it two parameters. It's looking for a real number and an imaginary number, right? Like here, it's looking for a real number and an imaginary number. So I added the two real numbers together and passed that, and I added the two imaginary numbers together and passed that. Another way I could have done it is if I had just created two doubles and added c1.r to c2.r, and then in the other double c1.i plus c2.i, so that, and then I just passed those. So basically, if I had done this instead, double r1 equals c1.r plus c2.r, and then I can say double r2 is c1.i plus c2.i. Instead of r2, I'll call it i1. And then here, I could have just given it r1 and i1. And this also works. What I could have also done is the following. Complex C equals new complex R1 and I1. So here I created a new object, and here I will return C. This basically is summarized into the one line that was written before. But if this is easier for you guys to understand, then that's perfectly fine. Next, we go on to the next part. So, it wants us to create two methods to subtract a complex number from another complex number. So basically it wants the same thing that we did here, but instead of add, we're going to subtract. Simple enough, right? So, I want to do the exact same thing here. Copy. Instead, I'm going to subtract, and I'm going to subtract. Here, minus, and here, I am subtracting. That is basically it for these two. Next, it wants a method to display the real and imaginary parts in the following form. 4.1 plus 3.9i. Okay then. So now, what I need to do is, I need to display. I'm going to return a string with the information I want to display. So, I will do the following. I will create this method. Sorry. I'll create this method, public string display, and I will return r plus I plus, actually r plus I. So this way it should return my real number plus my imaginary number with I at the end. Now I'm going to write my main method. In my main method, I'm going to test out my code. So the first thing I want to do is, I want to create two objects of type complex. So complex C1 equals new complex. And I'm going to give it two values, 5 and 6, 5 for the real and 6 for the imaginary. And I'm going to create C2, also new complex. And I'm going to give it 4 for real and 3 for imaginary. Now, I want to use my addition and my subtraction methods. Let's start with this one. So, what I'm doing here, let's start with this one. So what I'm doing here is, I am creating I'm invoking a method called add, and it takes in two parameters, two complex numbers, and it's going to return a complex number for me. It's going to add the real parts of the two complex numbers to each other, and it's going to add the imaginary parts of the two complex numbers to each other. So this is why I have to create two more complex numbers. So let's say complex C3, and what it does is, I'm going to invoke add on C1 and C2. This is basically C1 plus C2. Next, I will do the same thing, but this time I want to subtract. So complex C4 is subtract C1 and C2. So what's going to happen here is C1 minus C2. Now let's print our results. Now dot print, and I'm going to write C1 plus C2 equals plus C3. Now, I cannot just write C3 on its own like this. I will not get an error, all right? The program, the code will run. However, I will not get the value I'm looking for. Remember that C3 is an object, all right, of type complex. So if I want to print it out, I'm going to have to invoke the display method that I created that will display the values of my complex object the way I want it to. So this is why I'm going to have to write C3.display. I will do the exact same thing, but this time for C4. So I'm going to subtract here. All right, C4. Now I want to use my other method, which takes one parameter. But what it does is, it's going to take that one parameter of type complex, all right? It's not going to return anything, it's void, and it's going to add that, the real part of that parameter to the real part of my current object, or the object, again, for which I'm invoking this method. So, and it's also going to do the same thing for the imaginary part. It's going to add the imaginary part of this complex object to my complex object, or the object for which I'm invoking this method. Meaning, if I write C2.add C1, what I did was I'm invoking add on C2 and I'm passing C1. All right, so again, this will be C1 plus C2. The same thing would happen with the subtraction. However, let's print out the addition first. So if I print out system.out.println, and I want to print out what's written here. Again, you have to display. I cannot just print out C2. I will not get the correct value. Now, why is it that I am printing out C2? Because the values inside C2 are the ones that change. So as you can see here, the R of C2 will be R of C2 plus R of C1. And the I of C2 will be I of C2 plus I of C1. This is why I'm printing out C2, because the value of C2 changes. All right? Now I will subtract. If I write the exact same thing, C2 dot subtract C1, which means C1 minus C2. Actually, in this case, it's going to be C2 minus C1. Because what I'm doing here is I'm going to be subtracting the values of C1 from C2. So it's going to be C2 minus C1. All right? So now if I print here, it's going to be C2 minus C1, and I'm going to display C2. Let's see what we get. So if I run my code, here we are. So C1 plus C2, 5 plus 4 and 6 plus 3 gives us 9 plus 9i, correct. And 5 minus 4 and 6 minus 3 gives us 1 plus 3i, correct. Again, C1 plus C2, here for this one, we get 9 plus 9i, correct. Here, C2 minus C1, why are we not getting 4 minus 5 and 3 minus 6? Why are we getting 4 plus 3i? Since the value of C2 changes here because of this, so when we invoked subtraction on C2, invoking this method actually used the values that we got after invoking this method. So it used the new real and imaginary values for C2. So it used 9 plus 9i. These are the new real and imaginary values of C2. Therefore, when we do C2 minus C1, it will be 9 minus 5 and 9 minus 6, which gives us 4 plus 3i, which is correct. So this is basically it for this question, and I hope it was clear. If you have any questions about it, please email me. Okay, now looking at question number 1, a point in the Cartesian plane can be defined using its x and y coordinates. Part A, implement a Java class point. Alright, so we have a class called point. That part is done. Part B, augment your class of a constructor that initializes a point with both its x and y coordinates in addition to the parameterless constructor. So first we're going to do our default constructor, and our default constructor will be point. But of course, before we do that, we need to give it the two parameters, double x and double y. These are the two variables, or the two attributes. And then we will do the constructor, double x and double y. And we will say this dot x equals x, this dot y equals y, and now we go on to the parameterless constructor. So basically what they want is a constructor like this, and it will initialize values for x and y. So in that case, this dot x equals 0, and this dot y equals 0. It's parameterless because it initializes the values, does not need any values to be given to it. It automatically gives specific values to x and y. Now, the way this is written, it can also be written in a different way. So what we can do is write this 0, 0. What this means is that I am calling or invoking the default constructor. So you invoke it, you are giving it 0 and 0 as x and y. Therefore, this dot x will be 0 and this dot y will be 0. So this is another way to write it, using the keyword this. If you don't want to write it this way, you can stick to the original way. Next part. Augment your class with the following methods. Static add point 1 and point P2. Return a new point as a result of the summation of points 1 and 2, x coordinates and y coordinates. Alright, so we are going to need a static add method. So, static add public static add method, and it's going to take both P1 and P2. Point P1 and point P2. Part C. Augment your class with the following methods. Static add point P1, point P2 returns a new point as a result of the summation of the points P1 and P2, x coordinates and y coordinates. Alright, so we're going to need static point add because it returns a point, and we have point P1 and point P2. What happens here is that we have a double xx, which is equal to the x coordinate of P1, so P1 dot x, plus the x coordinate of P2, so P2 dot x. Then we have double yy, which is the y coordinate of P1 plus the y coordinate of P2. Then we create a new object of type point pp, new point, and we will pass xx and yy. We will give it these two new coordinates, and we will return pp. Of course, there's a shorter way of writing this, but if you are more comfortable writing it this way, it's fine. The shorter way is basically when we write return new point, and inside you'll write this part for xx instead of writing xx, and this part for yy instead of writing yy. So basically, if you comment this out, this works the same way. This is the shorter version. The longer version is here for you guys to understand a bit more. Next part is we want to create a method called add that takes one parameter, point P, and it adds the values of x and y coordinates. Alright, so again, what we're going to do is we're going to create a void method. It will not return anything. It just takes point P, and what it will do is it will make x equal to x plus the x coordinate of P, and y equal to y plus the y coordinate of P. So far so good? Okay, next, static swap point P1 and point P2. It swaps the values of the xy coordinates of both P1 and P2. And then we want the same thing again, but it will be swap with only point P. Alright, so since we have two coordinates and we're going to be swapping them with two other coordinates, we're going to need two temp variables. So public void swap this will be the one that takes only point P, double temp x. So here's the first temp. It's going to be equal to P dot x. And then here's the second temp. It's going to be equal to P dot y. And then we will say that P dot x is equal to this dot x, and P dot y is equal to this dot y. And then we will say that this dot x is equal to the temp value. We have temp x, and this dot y is equal to the temp value that we have, temp y. So what happened here is we are taking p dot x and p dot y, and we're swapping them with this dot x and this dot y. We will do the same thing again, but this time with a static void swap, and it takes two parameters, so we'll do the same thing. Static void swap, and it takes p1 and point p2, so two parameters. So here we'll have p1, p1, and he'll have p1, p1, and instead of this, it will be p2, p2, and here p2 and p2. All right, so this is the second swap. And finally, it wants us to create a toString method to override the implementation of the toString method that is already pre-existing to display the values of x and y coordinates. Okay, so we are going to create public string toString. Now, toString is an already predefined or pre-existing method. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to override it, so it will allow you to print the object or an object of type point the way you want. So we'll want to return it this way. We'll want x equals plus x plus y equals plus y. If you do not have this method, you cannot print the object. You will try to print the object and it will give you the wrong values. Therefore, you need to have something to help you display. Either you create a method that you invoke, call it display, call it show, call it whatever you want, that displays the object the way you want it to, or you override toString. Part D, augment your class with a class variable to keep track of the number of point objects created. So here, we want to add a variable that allows us to keep track of how many objects are being created. So we'll write static int count equals 0, and every time the default constructor is called, we will increment count by 1. Part E, augment your class with the main method to test your implementation. So let's test. So I'm going to write public static void main. And I will begin testing what I've done. So first I'm going to create a point P1, new point, and I'm not going to give it any parameters. This will automatically call the parameterless constructor. And then I will create another point, call it P2, but this time I will give it two coordinates, 30 for x and 50 for y. And now I'm going to start testing my methods. So first, let's test this method, the add. So if I write P1 dot add P2, it should add P1 and P2 for me. If I want to use this other add, I'll have to create an object of type point. So here, I can create point P3, and that will be equal to add P1 and P2. Now, if I want to swap, I have two swaps. The first one takes only one parameter, so I will invoke it on one of my objects. So let's say I'm going to swap P1 with P3. And my other option is to use the other swap, which takes two parameters. Actually, sorry, not that one, this one, which takes two parameters. So I will just call it swap P1 and P3. So now if I print everything, so P1, I want to print P1 to see what is it that I get. And then I also want to print P3 here. And here I'll print P1 and P3 to see what has changed. And then here I will print P1 and P3 again. And finally, I will print count. So let's run this code and see what we get. So, what happened here? I added P1 to P2, and because P1 is 0, 0, and P2 is 30, 50, I got 30 and 50. Now, for P3, I wanted to add P1 and P2. So I had to print out, oh, sorry, should have printed out P3. Let's run it again. I was wondering why there was a 3 over here. Okay, let me just add a quick thing that will help us in tracking what has changed and what hasn't. So if I run this now, I'll be able to keep track. Alright, so back again. So P1 here, because we're adding P2 to P1 and we are changing the value of P1, so here P1's value changed. So P1 becomes 0 plus 30 and 0 plus 50, so 30 and 50. Point P3, we're going to add P1 to P2. So we're adding 30, 50 to 30, 50. Because remember, P1 is now 30, 50. So when you add 30, 50 and 30, 50, you will get 60, 100. Now if I swap P3 with P1, therefore P1 is going to be 60, 100, and P3 is going to be 30, 50. Same thing here. If I swap P1 and P3, now P1 is going to be back to its original value, which is 30, 50, over here, and P3 is going to be 60, 100. Now if I count, I'm counting how many points I created. So I created 2 points. And so I get 2. Now this point did not count. Why? Because here, these 2 points, I am calling my constructors. But for this point, I'm not calling my constructor. I'm just using it to get the value of the addition of 0.1 and 0.2. That's why I only get 2 and not 3.